Good afternoon. Thank y'all for being here today for this briefing. I think it was probably relayed to you that Commissioner Taylor would be at this press conference today as well. I will tell you that in the last 24 hours, I have visited both the Walnut Grove facility as well as Parchman with Commissioner Taylor, having landed back in Jackson approximately 1 hour ago. And what I will tell you is that the Commissioner and I made the decision that his time was better spent meeting with the employees and the staff and others at Parchman, and so that's the reason that he is not here at this time. But I know he'll be available to you should you have follow-up questions as we move through this process. We know that there are problems in the system. We don't want to hide them. We want to fix them. And you have a role in that, and I want to recognize that right up top of this press briefing. A week ago, I stood here before all of you to share my plans to restore order in the Department of Corrections and rebuild trust in the system. I said that I would honor my promise to provide for the safety and dignity of all within the system and for all of Mississippi. I am a man of my word, and that work has been a focus over the first days of our new administration. Thanks to people like Commissioner Taylor, who, by the way, I stand before you on Thursday of this week even more convinced today than I was on Thursday of last week when I announced Commissioner Taylor that he is the right person to lead this agency in this interim period. But thanks to Commissioner Taylor and our partnership with the Department of Public Safety and the Department of Corrections, I'm proud to report that we are working hard every day to honor that promise for the people of our state. Day by day, we are making progress. Today, I want to provide a rundown of some of our first steps to restore order at Parchman since Commissioner Taylor hit the ground running on Monday. A lot of these changes will seem like common sense. That's because they are. They've been needed for a long time, but we are starting from where we are. First, we're working to improve the conditions there. In a lot of places, they're not good. There's no other word for it. They're terrible. I saw it myself today. We deployed maintenance teams from across the state of Mississippi to immediately begin work to improve the physical conditions at Parchman. We're bringing senior leadership to the front lines. We're making sure that a senior officer will be present on the grounds at all times to prevent the leadership void that can lead to chaos. We're cracking down on criminal coordination by using the managed access system to prevent contraband cell phones from being used in all of Parchman's housing units. These phones have been illegal for years, but they've been snuck in, and they're being used to coordinate gang activity throughout the Mississippi system and even throughout the country. That was a large part of what caused the recent series of killings to escalate as much as it did. It's a real problem, and it's got to be taken seriously to save lives. We want to make sure that corrections officers are not creating more problems than they solve. The vast majority of officers are doing difficult work for far too little pay and under very challenging circumstances. We all know that. We are all proud of them and grateful for their service. We also know, if you talk to anybody working in these facilities, that too many can be used by gangs operating within the prison to extend their power and sneak in contraband, including weapons. It's got to stop. There's a lot more to be done on this front, but one immediate step is to screen guards for signs of gang affiliation. That work is going on as we speak. We're also taking a look at prisoner distribution, making sure that people who are at risk of creating more violence aren't in jobs or locations that give them access to potential tools or targets of violence. We also need to make sure that prisoners who aren't as likely to be violent aren't sitting around without purpose all day. So we're taking a look at housing and jobs within the prison. Because it is our belief that some changes there could have a real impact. I'm pleased to provide an update on a previous announcement. I told you before that we would be deploying an agent to Parchman to conduct a wide-ranging criminal investigation. That agent has been identified and is on the ground now. That's what we're doing in our first few days to stop the bleeding. We also know that we need to work to rebuild the integrity of the system. That is a much larger conversation. And as I said a week ago, all options are on the table. I want to be clear. No final decisions on that front have been made in our first week. I also told you that I want to be transparent about our thought process, and so I want to keep you in the loop. One discussion that has been ongoing is opening other facilities to provide for better housing options. If we are going to implement real change and fix the current state of our system, I will not rely on secondhand accounts. I need to see it and experience it for myself. In the past 24 hours, I have been on the ground to see our facilities firsthand. Yesterday, Commissioner Taylor and I joined Sheriff Greg Wagoner, Senator Jennifer Branning, and Mayor Brian Gamillion at the Walnut Grove Correctional Facility. Touring around the prison, what I saw was thought-provoking. Everyone remembers the past issues at the facility. While the past corruption led to its closing, the foundation is something we can build on. We're paying for it right now as a state, and no one is there. It's not a country club, but the physical conditions are better than what some are dealing with in units at Parchman today. One of the common issues at Parchman and other prisons has been the hiding and passing of contraband, sparking a number of the recent conflicts. The construction of the cells in Walnut Grove would limit that. In each cell, the walls are poured concrete walls. This prevents the ability to chip away at mortar as compared to cinder blocks cells, which tend to be hollow in the middle, reducing inmates' opportunity to hide or pass contraband between cells. They have electronic cells as well as manual cells, which creates a flexibility within the facility that allows for tailoring distribution to the different types of inmates. A benefit of that flexibility is a majority of the prison could physically hold inmates as early as tomorrow. I also went, as I mentioned earlier, to the heart of the problem. Just an hour ago, I touched down back in Jackson after visiting the Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman. The first thing that struck me was that there are good people there trying to make a difference. I want to thank them. I want to make sure that we don't forget them. They are doing their absolute best in tough circumstances. As we work to root out corruption and incompetence, we can't forget those that are maintaining order today. We also saw some pretty rough conditions, particularly in Unit 29, where some inmates have just torn the place apart. Our new maintenance teams are on site trying to make it better. But there are tactical problems in the prison that have made that hard to keep up. I went to the room where the riots happened. Inmates that are known to be dangerous are being housed together without any structure to prevent violent collision. This has to be addressed. We've got a lot of big decisions to make about the future of the system here in Mississippi, about the near-term protection of people within the system, about the leaders we're going to bring in to right the ship. They aren't easy and they aren't quick, but we're going to make them and we're going to get them right. I've been appalled by things that I've learned in the last week, but proud of the potential that I've seen from many of the people working to rebuild. We've got a long way to go, but I can tell you with confidence that everyone in our administration is taking this very, very seriously. I'm not here to make empty promises. The issues within the department didn't happen overnight, and they won't be fixed overnight. It will be a long road, but we are making progress to restore Mississippians' trust in the system. Ultimately, this is not about the problems of the past. This is about paving the way for a better future, for the system and for Mississippi. And I am committed to seeing this through every step of the way. So with that, I'm going to open the floor to a couple of questions, and Ross, I'll come back to you. I saw your hand first.
Is there any talk right now about emergency funding or anything for getting guards to these prisons and fixing up those areas that you say are badly torn apart?
I'm sure there are conversations regarding funding. You will notice that in my remarks today, I did not mention the word funding. The fact is that if and when that becomes necessary, we will go to the legislature and ask for additional funding. Many of the steps that we are currently implementing are really more managerial and more ensuring that we are making competent leadership decisions. And so if decisions are made, for instance, to move inmates, or as the decision was made before I was sworn in to move inmates, that's going to require potential additional funding requests. But at this time, we don't have cash flow issues that we have to deal with immediately.
You have issues with there not being enough guards in the prisons, right?
Well, obviously there has been staffing shortages in the past that have been identified. As you know, there were a number of inmates that were moved from the state penitentiary into a private facility. Anytime you reduce the number of prisoners, then that reduces the number of guards that need to be on the facility to house them. And so we're not at this time asking for additional funding.
Are you considering closing Parchment temporarily and permanently to relocate prisoners to Walnut Grove?
At this point, we are considering all of our options. I will tell you, I did not only visit Unit 29 today, I also visited Unit 32. I also visited Death Row as well. And what I will tell you is the quality of the construction in the different units at Parchment vary. And so I don't believe that we find ourselves in a situation in which the entirety of Parchment would be closed. It's a matter of getting the inmates based upon their classification in the correct units. And I will tell you this, we are also currently in the process of reclassifying certain inmates to ensure that they are classified properly according to the risk associated with the individual inmates. Emily?
Does that mean removing them from the maximum security unit?
Well, it could go either way, Ross. It could be it could be reclassification so as to potentially lower their classification if the risk warrant it. It could also be that there are some inmates that are not properly classified that should be in maximum security that are not currently. So it could go either direction, and it's an ongoing attempt to address that. Emily?
A couple questions. Are there inmates currently in Unit 29?
Yes.
And there are inmates currently in Unit 32?
No.
Okay. So the ones that have been moved from 29 to 32 are no longer in 32?
That is correct.
They're either back in 29 or they're somewhere else?
They are, in essence, the number of, my understanding is that there were a number of inmates that were moved from 29 to Unit 32 as an immediate attempt to restore order in Unit 29. My understanding is it was something less than 360 inmates total, and those, as I appreciate it, were the 360 that were moved to the private prison. but there is currently no inmates in Unit 32.
So 29 was never emptied out altogether, is that right?
Not to my knowledge, it was not emptied out. Now there was a very strong, solid attempt by the Department of Corrections and the Department of Public Safety to reduce. The attempt was to eliminate the amount of contraband that was there, and so, but there were never, to my knowledge, not inmates in the various pods at Unit 29. Now, keep in mind, when you say Unit 29, Unit 29 is not one building. Unit 29 is a unit with multiple buildings, and therefore with multiple pods that house inmates. So there are parts of Unit 29 that are empty now, but not the entire unit. There are inmates in Unit 29. Yes, ma'am.
On the guard shortage, I understand that there is a vacancy or need for more than 1,000. So at what point do you see requesting funding to hire more guards and raise the salaries, or are you waiting for an assessment from Tommy Taylor and it's too soon to make that decision?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, the fact is, within the aggregate budget of the Department of Corrections, there are a large number of guards positions, guard slots in the budget that are funded that are not currently filled. And so, that being the case, we are constantly attempting to hire and replace guards in the system. And so it is not necessarily true that the lack of personnel or needed personnel, that their pins, it's a government term, their pins are not, they can be funded, just not currently have people in that pin. Yes, ma'am?
Are there steps you're currently taking to actually reduce the number of people in prison right now? Whether that's through administrative changes with regards to who can actually earn good time, or legislative reforms with regards to sentencing or parole eligibility?
Well, I will tell you that I've been on the job for 8 days now, and so we have not started the process over in the legislature with respect to that in terms of additional reforms. But I will tell you that we have been very engaged and very active over the last 3 or 4 legislative sessions, having worked on and enacted bills like House Bill 585, etc. I'm not sure if you were here last Thursday, but I will tell you that something that is factual is back in 2013, at its peak, there were over 22,000 inmates in the system. Today, there are less than 19,000 inmates in the system, and so there has been some progress made with respect to that. But our focus since Tuesday at noon of last week has been restoring order at Parchman and throughout the system. And so I think if you see, I believe that Renee has handed out a list of corrective actions that we've taken at the Department of Corrections, and that's really been where our focus has been. Thank you. Cordian?
You mentioned being appalled by all that you've learned in the last year. Obviously, you're no stranger to the legislative side of it, but being in the executive branch now and getting perhaps more detailed briefings, going and seeing it today, can you speak to that just a little bit more about kind of the maybe even emotional side of being an inmate?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a challenging environment. There's no question about that. I will tell you that I mentioned to one of the people that were in the facility with me, and I will tell you, we went in units that were currently housing prisoners, and I was closer to prisoners in Unit 29 today than I am to you right now. And one of the things that I mentioned to someone that was traveling with me is, while I understand that this is not possible, I wish we knew every Mississippian that was contemplating committing a crime and allowed them, before they made that mistake, to do what I did today. I think we'd have a lot less crime throughout Mississippi if that were the case. We are dealing with inmates that have committed, in many instances, very, very heinous acts, and so this is a prison, and that is a fact as well. But it is our responsibility to ensure that that we are housing them in an environment that ensures that their safety is protected, and that's something that we're going to work really, really hard to do. And so, yeah, it was definitely something that I think is important, that I actually be on the ground and see it. And as I mentioned earlier, the conditions vary significantly from unit to unit. The construction varies significantly from unit to unit. The ability of different inmates to affect the locks, for instance, varies significantly from unit to unit because the construction is different. And just so everyone is clear, the vast majority of the maintenance and construction challenges that exist, I say the vast majority, I want to say all, but I want to say the vast majority, which in my mind is 99.99% of the construction and maintenance challenges that exist are inmate created. They're inmate created. And so what we've got to do is we've got to ensure that we are housing inmates in an environment that limits their ability to continue to do that.
Anything you want to say to the families gathering today, like the victims of the inmates who have passed away? They're gathering today at the Capitol, rallying, talking about everything. A lot of them are saying they're frustrated. They haven't communicated how their loved ones have died. And then other family members we've talked to have said they don't even know if their family members are alive or not. Like, anything you want to say to them?
Well, what I would say is that that there are an awful lot of Mississippians that are praying for them, and I hope that they will pray for those of us that are doing everything we can to restore order in the system. Ross?
You said you learned about all this since last Tuesday, since you became governor, but you were lieutenant governor for the last 4 years. Were you not aware of all these problems? Other state leaders not aware of the serious problems at Parchman and the other prisons in the state?
What I would say to you, Ross, is that there are serious problems in every correctional system in America. There are serious problems at every correctional system in America because the inmates that are being housed in oftentimes cause and lead to many of the challenges that we're dealing with. I think what has happened in the past is in the past, and my administration is focused on improving conditions today and in the future, and that's what we're going to continue to focus on. Yes, ma'am.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about the agent that was hired that was reported to Parchman to conduct the investigation? Just talk a little bit more about that agent.
Well, I'm not going to talk specifically about the individual. What I will tell you is about the position, if that's okay. Historically, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations, which is a division of the Department of Public Safety, has had an individual housed, and I mean that from an office standpoint, housed at the Department of Corrections to ensure that not only were they involved and engaged in ensuring that corruption was minimized within the Department of Corrections, but also that there was massive communication between the Department of Corrections and the Department of Public Safety. Maintaining order is, in my mind, having that communication between those two departments is critical. It is absolutely critical. What you have seen from us is we are making a concerted effort for transparency. We're doing everything in our power to ensure that the Department of Corrections, the Department of Public Safety, and the Office of the Governor is transparent in what we are doing and transparent when an event occurs within our system. It is key. I think somewhere along the way, over the last several years, that level of transparency at the department has been limited, both internally within agency to agency, between corrections and public safety, as well as between the department and the media. Again, that's in the past, and I hope you recognize the efforts that we are taking to ensure that we are as transparent as possible. But the responsibility of this agent is going to be carrying out some of the steps that we are taking to immediately get order to limit contraband, etc., by things like fixing the guard screening process, cracking down on contraband cell phones, as well as investigating potential criminal activity that may be happening both inside the gates by the inmates, but also if there is any criminal activity being conducted by those who work at the facility. And look, when I say that, I want to be clear. I mean, we're not just talking about guards. There are a number of different individuals and groups of people who have access to the system, whether it's the cooks or or others that provide for various work at Parchment.
You said that historically that person has been there. Has he not been there in recent years?
He's not been there in recent years. Emily?
Question about the possibility of using Walnut Grove. That's a state facility, is that correct?
It is.
The state's paying for it.
It is a facility that the state has guaranteed the debt service on, but it has historically been run by private prison operator. It was shut down by the previous administration. They told me this yesterday. I believe it was in September 14th of 2014, if I'm not mistaken, was what they told me. September of 14, but we'll get you that specific date. But I think it was in early September of 2014. So it is when it was opened, and it was originally built, as I appreciate it, back in the late 90s, I believe 97, 98, 99. And so the decision was made the stated purpose was for financial reasons. That's what I was told at the time, for financial reasons. And keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, the number of inmates in this entire system peaked in 2013 at 22,000. Today, the number of inmates are less than 19,000. And so as the inmate population declined from 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, it certainly, to me at least, stands to reason that there are certain beds throughout the system that are shut down. But when you look at the quality of the construction in that particular facility, particularly the type of facilities, just things like, and this is not necessarily something that you think about unless you're involved in correctional facilities, but just the height of the roof, for instance. The height of the roof in the areas at the Walnut Grove facility is significantly higher than it is at Unit 29 at Parchment. Well, the inmates' inability to get to the roof limits their ability to do things like hide contraband in the ceiling, just as an example. And so the The facility at Walnut Grove was built much later than the facility at Parchman, and therefore I think from a facility standpoint has some advantages that Parchman does not. Unit 32, for instance, Unit 32 has single cells, which is a good thing, but the doors in those single cells, and it can house up to 1,000 inmates. The doors are easily is probably not a fair term, but the doors allow for the inmates to make it very difficult for the automated system to work, for instance. So they're able to jam the doors fairly easy just because of the way in which it was designed. In addition to that, Unit 32, again, individual cells, but there is a wall about this far across from the door which allows for the safety and security of the guards to be compromised just simply because of where that wall is. If that wall didn't exist, then we could potentially have a totally different conversation. So I say that to say when you talk about the conditions at Parchman, particularly as it relates to, for instance, a door lock not working properly, it's not that it doesn't work properly because it's been ignored, or it's not that it doesn't work properly because no one at corrections cares if it works properly. It doesn't work properly because the inmates have jammed it and made it impossible for it to lock. And so most of the challenges are either inmate caused or design flaws, and there may not have been design flaws 30 years ago when they were built, but given the sophistication of the inmates today, they're design flaws.
Governor, I'm sorry, on Walnut Grove,
one follow-up.
if the state, you mentioned that all things are still on the table, if the state were to transfer some prisoners to Walnut Grove, would that be privately run or state run?
It would most likely be run by a private operator.
You said you were pretty much face-to-face with some of the inmates, so did they know who you were? I mean, what kind of reception did you get?
Well, obviously there was a significant amount of security in the facility as well while I was in there. It's not as if we were having conversations. We were there to view the facilities and view the conditions under which inmates are currently living, and so it is very evident to me that we have challenges and that we are going to focus on fixing those challenges within the system and, quite frankly, from a facility standpoint as well. Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to push for higher wages for corrections officers?
Yes. We are going to work to improve salaries for correction officers in the state. In fact, we have been pushing to see that correctional officers received higher pay for a number of years now. Unfortunately, as we increased funding for those purposes over the last several years, it seemed that there are a lot of people at the top who got big pay raises, including the commissioner, whereas many of the correctional officers didn't see the kind of increases in wages that they should have. By the way, I mean, just so you understand, I did visit Walnut Grove and Parchman in the last 24 hours, but that's not the first time I've visited those facilities and not the first time I've ever visited a correctional facility in our state. I had in late 2018 a couple of hour conversation down at the facility in southeast Mississippi, talking directly to guards and the challenges that they face. The challenges that we have within the system are not limited to Parchman. The challenges in finding guards is not unique to Parchman. That is true throughout the system. And part of and let's be honest, part of the reason why that it is hard to find guards. It's a combination of things, because it is very difficult work, but it's also because the economy is doing very well in Mississippi, and the economy is doing very well throughout America, and so there are alternatives to these jobs, even in rural areas throughout Mississippi. That maybe these are alternative jobs that maybe were not available when the private prisons, for instance, were built years and years ago. And so there's more work to be done. But yeah, I do think part of the solution is going to be increasing wages for correctional officers. But I also want to be clear, and this is, it is often the rallying cry and the song that is sung by some. No matter what the challenge is in a governmental entity, more money is always the answer for some. That is not the case here. There may come a time where we have to ask the legislature for additional resources, and if that is the case, we will do so. But we're going to make changes here immediately that we think can make a real difference long term and short term, that are not necessarily inclusive of significant additional resources. Yes, ma'am.
I know you said that you talk to the guards and things like that, but you have ever thought about talking to the inmates about what they're experiencing? Because, there is a chance that some of these guards may actually be in on the stuff that's going on. Have you thought about doing that?
Well, I've only been governor 8 days, but I've gotten a lot of letters from inmates over those 8 days, I'm sure. The reality is, you're correct. Some of the guards, again, I believe it to be a relatively small percentage, but some of the guards are in on, to use your words, some of the bad things that are going on within the system. And so what I would tell you is the very reason that we have reinstituted putting an agent with the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation on the scene is because that individual not only has the ability to talk to the guards, he also has he or she has the ability to talk to the inmates and conduct a real criminal investigation on a number of these things. And I would expect that the individual that has been identified to do that has experience doing it and will do a fantastic job at it. So yes, I think talking to the inmates is certainly part of the process of the criminal investigations that are ongoing. Yes, ma'am.
Has any thought been given to having someone interface with these families, the families that have inmates there, the families that have lost loved ones?
Yes, I mean, I think that there's no doubt that we are that the folks at the Department of Corrections have contacted the individual families throughout the process, and I feel certain I will continue and be ongoing.
One more question, guys.
Emily?
In the last several days, there were 2 inmates beaten to death and 2 that died by hanging, apparent suicides. What is the management issue that needs to be addressed there so that these inmates were left unsupervised to the point that this kind of thing happened?
Well, let me first say it is my understanding that that none of the deaths over the last 5 or 6 days, none of the deaths were a part of the gang violence that took place when that led to the significant number of deaths earlier in the year. These were all, as I appreciate it, isolated incidents that had nothing to do with that particular gang violence. And so the challenge as you look at this scenario is with respect to the way in which we house the inmates. There are some who, for instance, might argue, why wouldn't you put every single inmate in solitary confinement? Well, the fact is that if you put inmates in solitary confinement for long periods of time, that leads in and of itself to additional challenges if and when they are no longer in solitary confinement. And so the reality is that we are working with a difficult situation, and we're going to do everything we can to ensure the safety of the individuals. But if you look at, for instance, the suicides, it is tragic. Any loss of life is tragic. There's no doubt about that. One of the things that you are seeing from us that maybe wasn't the case prior, there are suicides that occur in virtually every prison system across America. These are tough conditions.